We're thrilled to welcome Phil Grayeski, partner at KdT Ventures, to the show today. Phil, thank you for joining us on BIOS Ventures' inaugural episode.
Yeah, well, thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, Phil, let's kick things off. Can you share a brief personal intro with us?
Yeah, so I've kind of had a haphazard way that I've entered into this world of biotech investing. My background, I'm a scientist by training. I dabbled in many fields. I worked in biofuels engineering to nanoparticle development, AAV capsid design, until I finally settled on doing my Ph.D. in RNA structured drug discovery out of the Ken Weeks' lab at UNC-Chapel Hill. So I've been a kid in a candy shop when it's come to science. But while I was actually in grad school, I helped spin out 3 therapeutics companies. I helped spin out StrideBio with Arvind Asokan, which was doing AAV capsid design to block neutralizing antibodies. I then worked with Ribometrix to do RNA structured drug discovery with small molecules targeted towards RNA structures. And then most recently, I spun out TorqueBio as a co-founder with Arvind Asokan, Pat Ritchell, and Scott McPhee, which is doing circular RNA gene therapy. And so this operational experience combined with the scientific experience led me to wanting to fold that into what we do here at KdT Ventures, where I've been a part of the firm since 2018 in April. So I try to help continue to maximize impact and look at cool science daily.
And it sounds like that breadth of exploration on the back end really gave you a lot of that exposure around diligencing, but also deep tech to bring to KdT. And so before we dive too deep, can you just provide a brief overview of KdT Ventures for us? We'd love to understand more about your core philosophies as a firm and view that as context for the broader conversation.
Yeah, so KdT, we're the standard of early stage investing in the frontier sciences. We try and be first money into companies where we invest at intersections of computation, data science, biology, and chemistry, because we think that physical layer of the world is now in play and programmable, meaning biology and chemistry. Given that we can read and write these layers in new ways with some of these technologies, we think we can drive innovation and actually program these layers in healthcare, chemicals, agriculture, and even consumer bio, as a lot of these tool sets that you typically saw in traditional therapeutic development have been commoditized for these other verticals. And so really we try to bring a Hippocratic oath to investing, right? We want to do no harm, maximize impact, and help move the world forward by tackling really large problems in the space. And that's really our core philosophy here at KdT Ventures.
I'd love that message. It's something where moving forward, exciting tech for positive impact is something I think we can all get behind. And it sounds like KdT is doing that with a pretty broad breadth, which aligns with your background perfectly. So let's take that step back then. You described your journey to science and to venture as haphazard. And I think previously you've mentioned that your attraction to science really began later in high school. So let's start at the beginning. Love to learn a little bit more about you and what brought you to chemistry.
Yeah, I would bio, right? I love biology because I really enjoy problems with high complexity. Biological systems, as you well know, are inherently complex. They're multivariable. They have this puzzle-like feel that's really appealing, where you can have these small discoveries that lead to another until you start to see this complete whole picture. That was something that I just have always enjoyed about science, is that like inherent randomness that can occur. And what's really, I think, a blessing of the field and really my job is that I can combine that intellectual stimulation with actually having impact, right? Like if we do our jobs right here as early stage biotech VC, we are like the stage gate to letting these opportunities through that may have some role in fixing really big problems, right? We can work with those founders to help treat disease, solve climate change challenges, fix our food supply, and many other issues. And so biology is a unique way to have that, deal with that complexity while also maximizing impact for humankind. And that's something that initially just drew me in, and what I wanted to work on those type of challenges.
Well, you were modest with your intro earlier, but from your high school days, you then moved to undergrad, where you completed a double major in chemistry and genetics. You pursued a master's in philosophy in Bioscience Enterprise over at the University of Cambridge, while also at the same time working for Lone Pine Capital. And then from there, as you started to describe, you moved to UNC and did your MD, Ph.D, while also becoming active as an operator, spinning out 3 companies. And so first and foremost, what an incredible journey, Phil. That's something I think we can all be excited by on your behalf, because it's clear you had a passion for exploration. And it sounds like at that intersection of science and entrepreneurship from the very beginning.
Well, thanks, Chris. I'm deeply flattered. I'm light on the intro because I always feel a little uncomfortable talking about myself, if I'm being honest. So I appreciate you providing more color to it. Thanks.
Yeah, but so did you always recognize that you had an interest at that intersection of science and entrepreneurship? Did you know that your breadth of exploration would lead you to biotech innovation and potentially venture?
Not really, right? So like I mentioned, I like highly complex problems. I think that it keeps me entertained because I might have potentially some inability to focus. But drug development seemed like one of the hardest problems to challenge, and it was the most interesting to me, right? You have to make the science work. You have to get it through probably the hardest regulatory hurdles that we have. And then you're combining that with market risk that is very tough to know, as well as starting a business, which is a classically hard challenge. And so when you have all those different fields having to integrate together and work to be successful, it was just one of those really cool puzzles. And so I ended up really asking on the drug development side, what gives me the most shots on goal, right? Because if I'm an academic scientist, because I initially, when I went to do my MD PhD, right, I was really excited about it because I was like, okay, I'm going to be able to go bench to bedside with some kind of research or discovery. But what I realized was that's really a misnomer, right? You really go bench to business to bedside. And I didn't appreciate that. It was a little bit naive. But I knew from that experience, I maybe have 2 to 4 shots on goal, right? Because I might spend my entire life's work pursuing some target or strategy that probabilistically has just a limited chance of success. And I would pass on, let's say even like I validated some target, I found some molecule that hit that target and may have some therapeutic effect, right? I'm passing that off to someone else to then take it into their hands. But there's a lot of work in both basic science and translational science that has to go into getting that to a credible state.
You're giving me flashbacks to my own grad school days as well.
Yeah, it's tough, right? Especially when you're an early scientist, right? And you're just getting trained. You don't really understand what story you're working on that fits this bigger picture. But a PI, man, they have an incredibly hard challenge that I deeply respect. But it's like they have to find all the little puzzle pieces. I feel like they're actually like building, they have to put all the edge pieces together on the puzzle, right? To even get a starting point to build it. If I'm going with continuing with that puzzle analogy. And that's just, that's a hard thing to do. And you don't really know where you're working on yet in that puzzle. And so then as an operator, I started to get more interested in that translation component of like how do you actually turn science into a commercial opportunity. And that was, I realized I could probably get 5 to 10 shots on goal, right? Luckily, we live in an environment where I think in the US, right? Because when I was first getting exposed to innovation, it was through Europe. Europe's unforgiving about failed entrepreneurship. At least in the US, like being an operator, failure sometimes can be a sign of wisdom. Like as long as you know and you've credibly managed those risks and you protected those downsides and you saw where things went wrong, as an operator, you could reasonably have 5 to 10 shots on goal. And so it became, that's when I started to shift from maybe I don't want to be this academic MD PhD scientist. Maybe I want to be this, operational scientist or this company leader in the future. And I started to explore that route as well, which led to Stride and Ribo and then Torque Bio.
And then from there, you began the pivot from founder to investor. And even while still in grad school, it sounds like. Can you tell us a little bit more about that pivot?
Yeah, the whole doing all this while I was in grad school was quite humorous. I was definitely an ugly duckling of my med school class because I would be like going from cardiology lectures running over to like, I got to pitch to Unicure with StrideBio in the early days. I got to pitch to Harold Petrie, who was he was a part of overseeing the first gene therapy that was approved. And so that was such a surreal experience and it was a lot of fun. But yeah, that pivot from being that founder to investor, it was more of a natural extension, right? I realized I could have even more shots on goal at impact. At KdT, for example, now we're on Fund 3. We've invested across all those funds over 40 companies to date. The trade-off really, though, comes between being a founder versus an investor is your level of involvement, right? As an operator, you have to live and breathe your company's mission to be successful or guarantee success as much as you can. But as an investor, I get afforded a really nice ability to step in and out of providing really high impact input on decisions for my companies. And I really like that time versus influence ratio to impact many of those problems, right? And what's great is I arguably get to see the most interesting problems in company operation and execution as a result. And that's only if I work properly as a partner with my founders, right? If I'm not working as a partner to my founders, I miss that incredible, intellectual stimulation and engagement that I could have in my portfolio. And so that's why I just stay quite close to my founders as being a partner for their operational executional success. And so that's why I was like, I really like what I'm getting to do as a venture investor, and have tended to deviate more from that operational role into an investing role as a result.
And so as you thought about that and you leaned into investing, which based on your experience, based on your background, really does seem like a natural extension. Why KdT?
Simply, it was the people of the firm. It's both why I've joined and why I've stayed, right? When I joined the fund, Kane had started the fund in November 2017. I joined in April 2018 because at the time, right, I was, Kane and I, we met through, believe it or not, a mutual contact that I played pickup basketball with. And I saw Kane's portfolio, and he was out in Asheville, North Carolina at the time. Now, Asheville, for folks who might not know it, it's known for brewing beer, North Carolina, not really known for biotech. And so he was in companies at the time. He was in Solugen and PathAI, some really cool investments that I really agreed with those opportunities. And I think at the same time, he was like, who's this med student that's spun out a couple pretty successful biotherapeutic companies? And so, we linked up, and I quickly realized on potentially a little bit of a liquor walk through Chapel Hill, talking about ideology and investing, Kane and I realized he wanted to truly build something different. We have a motto at KdT. We really want to be the nicest VCs you'll ever meet. And as example, kindness is one of our first values of our company. And as a former operator that's dealt with the sharp elbows of traditional venture capital, like I've had to deal with that and it stunk. I really wanted to help build something that espoused those values of collaboration and kindness. And so notably, Kane, like, to all testament to him, he let me build KdT with him, right? He took a bet on a part-time graduate student, part-time investor to help him run KdT for several years now, right? And he had to have a lot of trust and courage in my roles at KdT, and I think it helped pay dividends. And so I got to see my fingerprints all over an organization. And I think what I really was just doing was parlaying my interest in building companies into building a firm, right? I see them quite similarly in many different ways, and being able to be a co-pilot with Kane for quite a bit of time has just been truly a blessing. And he's just an incredible person to work with. And I think from the future hires we've thus made with Mac and Rima and Kathan and Benji and Youssef, it's continued to be really great folks that we're bringing into our organization here.
Oh, that sounds like a phenomenal partnership from the beginning. So while we're on the topic, and given your own experience and your own background, you talked about being the ugly duckling, and that's something coming from a position of scientific training. That's something I can relate to, having an interest that might overlap with some others and from the translation, but really wanting to be much closer to it and having a breadth of areas where you're interested in instead of focusing on one. So while we're on the topic, do you have any advice for those who are earlier in their careers, maybe even still in academia, seeking to pursue venture or entrepreneurship?
Yeah. So the funny part about why I was such an ugly duckling is I trained at UNC-Chapel Hill, right? So UNC-Chapel Hill is consistently in the top 4 on one of the med schools for primary care, which tends to mean that like some really high quality character individuals that are very pure-hearted go to that school to train, right? Like these are people who want to do primary care and like work in family medicine, internal medicine, and be that quarterback of care for patients. And I mean, my med school class, the people I was there, just some of the highest quality folks I've gotten to ever come to know and work with. But as a result, right? When I'm this guy who's like, oh, I want to go work with biotech and pharma, it was kind of like the dirty word. Oh, you're trying to commercialize medicine. You're trying to do these things. There's definitely a tension there. And so when I say I was the ugly duckling, I mean, like, I was the ugly duckling of UNC. I don't think they have attached my name to anything so far out of like a press clipping for the school as a result, partially because like it's somewhat of a dirty word to do entrepreneurship and innovation, I think, at that school versus probably some of these other schools that have embraced it more, like Harvard or Stanford or some of these institutes that have seen that success. But I think UNC is a remarkable institution. And so it's just funny, the ugly duckling thing is what you picked up on, because it really was that. And thus, I think my advice for folks is a little bit cliche, right? But it relates to that, which is really remain authentic to what you want to do. I think right now in venture more than ever, our world's increasingly, and I think our generation's just increasingly getting pushed onto social media. And I think social media is an amazing tool, right? But there's also a lot of pressure when you are in that public light to try to deviate away from authenticity, right? You don't, you don't want to upset folks, rightfully, right? But you also are trying, especially on the innovative side, you're trying to push the envelope on where the world should be going, right? I think there was one founder who told me that, entrepreneurs are kind of like, they're people coming from the future, right? They're like time travelers. They're coming from the future and telling you how the world should be, and because they've seen it. And a lot of the times that's not, if they're truly disruptive, is not a very comfortable image to provide, right? And so I think social media there's a nuanced balance to how do I continue to engage with the world while also not being while like not being fake and having a broader audience to talk to. And so I think for people coming up through this, I think if you continue to just pursue what interests you, maybe it's on social media, or maybe it's not, and just devote yourself to those things, that'll work out. And so that's where I would say my advice comes from, because I think so much of what we're trying to do is, share the knowledge that we have with others, and we have really great technologies at our conduit. And so just staying true to what you want to do and what you want to focus on, I think will pay dividends. But it's an incredibly cliched answer. So I'll have better ones as the time goes on, I think, for advice.
Yeah, and we can hop back to it at the end if you'd like. But for now, cliched maybe, but coming from someone who has a story that supports it and talking about it in the lens that you do, I still think is probably going to be really validating for people out there, including myself, who are coming from backgrounds that maybe feel a little out of place where they are, and who also get to know that there are other people going through that same journey. So staying true to yourself, being genuine, always advice I'm happy to hear someone give. But on that topic, let's talk a little bit more about KdT, because we've touched on this briefly, but I really want to dive into it this time and talk about how KdT differentiates itself. So as you've said, KdT focuses on early stage life science venture investing and helps companies re-architect the world by writing that physical layer of biology and chemistry. We talked about being the kindest VCs out there, and that's something that it's starting to even be born through from our conversation. But in your words, how do you like to differentiate?
So the way I think KdT differentiates itself is really two main things: people and strategy. In terms of people, right? It's the reason why I joined the firm. Our team is composed of 4 physician scientists, a computational biologist, and a Swiss Army knife of a corporate lawyer on the team, right? None of us are spreadsheet junkies. I think that team, right? It's rare at an early stage of investing. Like Kane was a practicing pathologist that worked at the HHMI, and Remo was a practicing neurologist that studied lipid metabolism, right? Those are the colleagues I get to work with on a daily basis that are doing early stage investing. And so that's a highly unique set of skills focused at that stage. And I think what's quite notable is that we all left quite safe and nice jobs or tracks to help build KdT. So we're really invested in what we're doing, and I think we provide a unique technical perspective around it. And I think you can't get away from it. But what's quite notable on our team, we're all under 40 years old, right? Now that obviously will have its trade-off, right? We're not, there's a wisdom that comes with age that we're not naive to, and that's why we love working with a variety of partners. But I think what happens is, as a result, is we're bringing in a level of energy, enthusiasm, and just generally effort that I think resonates with most folks, because we gave up those careers to go do this. And so I think that people component is what really differentiates us. I think from a strategy perspective, as well as a fund, is our structure, right? So we've always been a sub $100 million venture fund. And I really don't foresee that changing soon, right? And what I think about that fund size is it creates the most alignment with founders, LPs, and co-investors, right? All the parties that are really involved in venture capital. For founders and co-investors, they know we're going to live or die by that first check. These aren't like call options for us that it can be at some larger funds. And thus we have to bust our butt, right? When we're working on a company, we make that investment in, like they know we are going to work our tail off to ensure success. And what's nice about it is also an unoffensive check size for a lot of folks, right? It allows us to collaborate within a syndicate appropriately. So because we are trying to be, the nicest VCs, we're trying to be kind, right? Collaboration is inherent to that. And given that we can be Switzerland in a lot of deals, folks like working with us. And then as for in terms of LPs, right? The reason why they like that fund size is AUM is always the enemy of returns, right? I'd much rather return a 10x fund than a 2x fund, and just to continue to raise those at a quicker cadence than raising them all together. I think when you have too much capital, you can be quite inefficient. And so what allows us at that smaller size, the same way biotechs can be more nimble than large pharma, I think as a VC, a smaller VC, we can be more responsive to market and more nimble as a vehicle, as a vehicle of capital. And so I think those two things, people and strategy, are what allow KdT to really differentiate itself in market.
Yeah, and that, as you said, you're on Fund 3, so your LPs must believe in that level of success, and it's clearly borne fruit from the portfolio of phenomenal companies you're supporting.
Yeah, we've been blessed. We've worked with really great partners, both on founders in our portfolio as well as investment partners who've backed the fund, and so we're just incredibly grateful.
Let me actually dive into something a little bit further. You talked about being the kindest in the space, and that's something that I'd love to hear, because as you point out, coming from that operator background, there are occasionally some sharp elbows. Have you found that trying to live up to that value has caused challenges in your journey so far to build the fund?
Absolutely, right? At some point, right, there's times you'll meet a founder that you absolutely want to invest in because you just love working with him, her. But the problem is maybe the opportunity isn't right at the present moment, right? Maybe it's not it's not tractable yet because the technology isn't there, the market isn't timed well, and so for a lot of those opportunities, the way we try to still be proactive and helpful is, hey, here, let me connect you to folks that I know this will be interesting in, or let me give you really direct feedback. When we write a no email, we really try to put a multi-paragraph response and highlight every single thing about where we had issue and try to be very clear about where we came on the decision and where we think this feedback will be helpful for the founder when they come back to us potentially. They're like, look, we've worked these two things out. These were your biggest risks. We've now solved these. Do you want to come work with us again? And so that's where I think, it becomes challenging because you just can't say yes to everybody. You have to be a good steward of capital. And to try to be kind, the way we do it is by providing really direct feedback, providing, really clear insights into how we're thinking. And I think that's a way you can put our words into practice at KdT.
It's a level of transparency that I know firsthand founders really appreciate. And as you say, it's a great message that a no is very rarely an absolute no for all time. If you have a few things you can fix and work on, and you can come back with that founder mindset of, I always have an area to improve, I can hustle, I can make this better, and then come back again, it's a great message to be sending.
Yeah, and I remember when I was trying to help with fundraising, there's so many times I sent out emails and the only thing I got back was a one sentence oh, I don't think this is a great fit for a fund. I'm like, cool, thanks, that's helpful. What do I do with that? And so it's just that resonates with me so much. When I remember when I was just starting, I saw what Kane, his template for first no email was, and I was like, it's what gave me a lot of excitement and enthusiasm joining here.
That's yeah, when you find good people, you want to work with them. And it sounds like Kane has started something that's really built a snowball effect, and clearly you've been a part of that ball rolling. So let's actually dive back. You were talking about market conditions. You were talking about assessing companies. Let's go there. Building on what we talked about from your differentiators as a fund, can you describe now also, and you've done this a bit, what your diligence process looks like? What do you look for when you're trying to separate signal and noise and evaluate companies?
Yeah, so I'll be honest. So I'm located out of Durham, North Carolina, in the Research Triangle. And so one of the blessings of being here, and Kane and Mac are in Austin, Rima's in Houston, Benji and Kathan are up in Chicago, right? What's great about those locations is we don't really have to worry about noise so much, right? Like we avoid a lot of that groupthink that I think occurs in the major ecosystems of Boston and the Bay Area. That being said, there's a trade-off, right? Like we have to be very cognizant of not being out of the flow of venture, right? Like what deals are being transacted or happening. And so I think what's nice is we just need to be aware of it, but not consumed by it. And it's really helpful to not have to deal with noise out there. And so thus we have to be really good at finding signal. And so the way we focus on signal, I think comes from a pretty bottom-up approach that we use for investing. So typically we have a topical area of interest that we've been exploring or thinking about. And now this comes from either our personal research, or more commonly, the founders in our portfolio, right? If we are really backing who we think are visionaries of the future and these great founders in our portfolio, often we are collaborating with them to find out where they think the next edge is in the world. And they're giving us great insight. So if we pick good founders, great investing begets great investing, right? And so we typically find where they think the world is going, and then we start building a thesis around that area. And so we've actually built up computational strategies, one where we track rising stars in academia, and then two, we actually search for hidden founders in the world through some of these computational algorithms that we've built up at the firm. And this tends to lead us to find these great companies. And then from a diligence process, what it really comes down to, beyond just deal sharing with other VCs, right? Like that's another big way inflows come in. When we find great companies, we are really looking for three main criteria, right? We're trying to find one, a clear competitive edge of a scientific platform. So for an early stage investor like us, we really need optionality, given that the time horizon for these companies is a little bit greater. They need to be able to adapt to changing markets and opportunities. And then we need to see really clear competitive edge around a platform. Second, we need to have a company being run by an incredible founding team. And so that typically requires two individuals. One, you really need a CEO, and we're looking for someone who has a killer instinct, right? Like, even though we are the kindest VCs and that, we try to be that, right? We are trying to find a CEO who has that killer instinct, that knows how they're going to build a strategy to make a monopoly. And so, we're kind but shrewd, and I think our founders are the same way. And so we're also looking for a CSO who deeply understands how science can translate to business. Now, sometimes that individual can be a hybrid of both, be both the CEO and CSO. But largely, those are like the two phenotypes of characters we're looking for constructing that team. And then lastly, which I think is becoming even more important in this market now, is we've always been looking for companies that have some level of external validation. And so that can come through either data or revenue. And so what we're starting to ask now is, are there large buyers that are interested in your technology, right? The same way data speaks for itself, I feel like revenue also speaks for itself. And these next wave of biotech companies coming to market, you're going to see that become a much more prescient need, where they need to show, look, I'm not talking to just some small mid-cap pharma or biotech. I'm talking to Bayer, Roche, Pfizer, someone who has these operating budgets that can make significantly sizable investments or scale up or help with CMC and other different challenges they're in. And so that's typically our investment criteria and how we find those opportunities.
And so as you're thinking about those stories, as you're thinking about learning about these founders, do you have any recommendations for startups reaching out to KdT?
Yeah, I have two things. One, I think you should have strong opinions that are loosely held, right? So we want to see conviction from our founders, but we also, if you're claiming to be some form of scientist or data scientist, you also should be someone who can adapt in the face of data, right? And as a founder, in every pitch I was ever in, I learned a lot from those conversations. I had to respond quickly to what people were putting forward in front of me. So thus the loosely held component is if you see compelling data that refutes your argument, don't just stand blindly convicted, adapt in that conversation. And then the last thing I think is be vulnerable and human, right? We want to work with folks that we also want to see successful and that we want to enjoy working with, right? Life's too short to work with jerks, and vulnerability is one of the best ways you can endear yourselves to humanize yourself, and be someone that you want to be around. And so I think those are the two things that we'd recommend to people reaching out to KdT.
I love that addition of be human. I think it's something that, as you say, if you want to work with someone, that's always an encouraging sign. And you're building a 10-year relationship here when you're working with a startup, be it you're the founder, you're joining, or you're an investor. And that's a partnership that's going to last a long time. As you said, I don't want to be starting a 10-year relationship with a jerk.
Yeah. The board dinners become much more awkward if that's the case.
All right, good point. So then let's take this in a slightly different direction now. You've talked about liking to get involved in companies from the earliest stages, not only being the first check-in, but also KdT tends to reserve a small bucket of each fund to create ventures in areas of the country that are overscienced but underfunded. Tell us more about venture creation at KdT.
Yeah, so in vast majority of investing is done in Boston and SF, right? I think it's up to 60% of all venture dollars go to those two locations in the world, or not SF, but the Bay Area largely. And the problem is there's just an incredible amount of science being done elsewhere, right? Like I was actually looking at Science Translational Medicine today, and going through their top articles, and the 4 articles that they highlighted, they were all just from these like terrible schools, like WashU in St. Louis, NYU Langone, right? Hopefully my sarcasm breaks through the audio here for folks listening, but like there's amazing science being done by other amazing universities. And so yeah, I just think that being a homer of the Research Triangle ecosystem in North Carolina, I just think you're going to be able to find opportunity elsewhere. And I think we've done a good job demonstrating that at KdT here. And so the way we look at venture creation is, right, a lot of the big Boston groups specifically just do venture creation up in Boston, right? And they're the ones that have proven this practice in place. And they also take like a vast majority of the company, where I'm not sure what the financial return is for a lot of these early stage like professors who think this is a great opportunity. And so we try to reinvent venture creation just a little bit here at KdT. And I think we're just well positioned to do it, right? You have Mac, who's our in-house lawyer. He's well positioned to set up the company, effectuate early stage agreements, whether it be partnerships or hiring. USAF, we brought in a head of talent at KdT. He helps with the early search and building out, finding the top talent for this company and building out that C-suite. But then between Rima, Kane, and myself, right, we've all either built or helped build a variety of different entities to help push early stage scientific progress forward. And so it's a bit different than that early Boston model, because what we're really doing is building the early stages of that company to get it to drive to our Series A partners that we like to work with and collaborate with. And so we have to have really high conviction, and thus it's a smaller opportunity of our funds, but it's something that we are regularly looking for and have the capability to execute upon.
And as you've pointed out, KdT has built and also invested in some incredible companies that span a wide variety of areas: biotech, tech bio, synbio, healthcare, companies like 54Genes, Xylus, Solugen, PathAI, Rejuvenate, forgive the slip of the tongue. So as an investor spanning all these diverse opportunities, building companies, can you share more about how you develop your investment theses? You've talked about having them come from the founders, but I assume you also do a little bit of development of your own. Yeah,
so likewise, right, it's a really bottom-up approach, right? And hopefully I don't reiterate too much here, but it's basically like there's areas that we've tracked from our perspective, right? So I come from like a delivery background, a gene therapy background with now RNA structure. And so I tend to know where the edge cases are of like where the frontier technology, like what are once I see this enabling experiment done, that now validates that delivery vertical and like non-viral vectors, for example, right? I will have those internal targets on my own, right? And that will come from my personal research. But then the founders, right? These are some of the brightest people we get to work with. They're also going to see the cutting edge of what's going on, because they either get pitched by other early stage founders and like, how did you build that company? And so often there's some information flow that comes that way, where it's like, look, let's actually build a thesis around this and see, when does this technology really get actualized, right? Like, what is that killer experiment that needs to happen to validate this tech stack? When is the market going to be ready for this, right? Like, I don't think, the proteomics market, for example, was actionable for what we're seeing now with like Nautilus and some of these other companies. I don't think the market that they were addressing was actionable 5 years ago, but maybe it might be actionable now with some new technologies that are coming about. And the market might be right given the data-oriented approach we're doing to biotech building. And so it's an assessment of market readiness, technical aptitude that fills up that bottom-up approach. And then really it's about finding folks, right? Beyond just what we do from working with partners and co-investors, a lot of it is we built, computational programs at KdT that allow us to track some of these rising stars in academia. Like, we're trying to find these like people on that J curve in academia that are like young, hungry professors, like our young, hungry team. Or what we're also trying to do is find hidden founders. And so we have different ways that we go about those. And then we just reach out and try to network and talk to those folks as much as possible. And so that's how we develop those investment theses.
That makes sense. You're starting from areas of knowledge, either from yourself or your team or your founders. And then from there, figuring out what is that killer experiment, as you said, to take you to that next level in terms of a technology leap. And then on top of that, you're also taking it from the people angle, which from the beginning of VC, it always has been. So who are and how do you find the people who are going to be successful as founders? It's a very rare phenotype. And I would make the argument, and I suspect you'd agree, but push back. It's harder to find a great founder than it is to find a great technology to commercialize.
I'm an anomaly in that it's an interesting one. I just have such a reverence for like really good science that like I worry that there's a lot of times inadequate science gets funded, and I actually think like finding the really game-changing, the stepwise innovations can be just as hard as finding the founder on that paradigm. But I do agree, both of them are rare. So you won't get pushback on that. Both of them are extremely rare. Whether one's rarer than the other is where I sometimes have pause, because I know that's a common sentiment among a lot of biotech VC. So it's not. I don't think what you're saying is controversial. It's just I just kind of think about the two and not really sure where I land.
No, and we're seeing some public market pullback for exactly that reason, right? There's excitement around technologies and around those visions of the future, and that can lead to investment in technologies that might not be ready for prime time, shall we say. And so I do think there are balances to the two, but just as you point out, it's probably difficult to quantify one against the other. So
yeah,
talking about great companies and recognizing that it's probably near impossible to choose. So feel free to pull back if this isn't something you feel as though you can answer. But are there any companies in the portfolio, maybe you've helped launch, you've been a part of from the beginning, that you'd love to highlight? What was that first glimmer of greatness that's kept you excited since the investment?
Well, I actually think this dovetails nicely with that last question, right? So Andy's Bio, it's out of the Bay Area, led by Gonzalo Fuenzalida. It's one of those, it shows how our investment theses led to an investment. So, I've largely tracked the soil microbiome space. It's just an area of interest of mine. And I've watched companies like Pivot and Indigo really make a lot of splashy headlines. And we saw why, right? They had some really great data showing how soil microbes actually can impact plant growth and embed novel plant functions beyond just what plants have as their inherent genetic traits. But they were all done in a greenhouse condition. And so coming from the world of gene therapy, I realized what was missing was the delivery component, right? Because what Pivot and Indigo are doing is they're basically applying these microbes outside of the seed once these things get planted, right? Indigo is pioneering coatings, Pivot was they're actually trucking around liquid across the country as like a addition to fertilizer to spray on the ground. And what happens is the bugs around the seed either just get washed away by rainwater, or you have microbial competition in the soil that these bugs are now killing these ones that you want to stay in the soil to help your plant grow. And so coming from gene therapy, I saw an analogy. I was like, look, they're missing the delivery equation. So we had been tracking internally, when will the soil microbiome world figure out delivery? And so Andy's bio was our answer. So Andy's actually figured out how to load the bug into the seed itself, right? So they put the microbe in the seed itself. And that actually solved two things. One, that we understood, right? The science and efficacy equation, right? Because if the bug is inside the seed, then once the plant germinates, that microbe will endophytically incorporate and not have to worry about soil runoff or microbial competition. And so it solves that scientific challenge. The challenge that was less appreciated that we learned from Gonzalo as we were talking through him with early pitches, it also solves a business logistic one, right? Because unlike Pivot, who has to truck around liquid across the country to like spray on the ground, because it's built into the seed itself, farmers don't have to like do anything different to their practice to be able to plant these seeds. And on top of it, you don't have that environmental component of carrying something that's heavyweight apart from what was, and like there's no additional weight to these seeds compared to trucking around these like jugs of liquid. And so it solved both the business side and the scientific side. And that's really was that initial glimmer of greatness. Can you imagine like embedding this delivery technology, which they call microprime, and just stacking all these great traits that we found from the soil microbiome into agriculture and across all these different row crops? Like that was really interesting to us. What has kept us excited about this company, though, is Gonzalo himself. So to your point about having great founders, Gonzalo is a rarity. He's an amazing founder that has shown an ability to adapt and continue to crush opportunities, right? Like, so he's seen what's been going on in the carbon credit market and has basically found a way to, that's now his next trait. Like he was just doing nitrogen fixation. Now he's found his second trait, which is carbon capture. And he's actually creating high quality, scalable, permanent carbon credits that are unique in market, right? At a low cost, right? So all these other carbon credits is like direct air capture, super expensive. And on the other side, these forestry projects are a load of crap. Sorry for my French. And so like you need something else that's scalable, low cost, and high quality. Andy's has that carbon credit in market. And then I think what's really unique is Gonzalo has continued to show some foresight. So he's seen how this is a multi-party field. So he's had to figure out, oh, I need to build a novel verification platform, which he's now done. Oh, I need to build a novel scalability platform to even treat my seeds faster and at larger scale, because I know how much seeds I'm going to need to treat to meet these goals. And so his ability to think through multivariable challenges has just continued to give us the confidence that Andy's is one of our shining stars across all the KdT funds. And so that's why, it shows you how, I think speaks to your question, how do we build up these theses? How has it actually influenced our investing? And how important is the founder to a company? Because founders are very important to a company, but it was that rarity of delivery, scientific opportunity, but Gonzalo keeping us continually excited about his innovative thinking that has led us to back Andy's.
Should have just started with the example, because as you said, that covered everything. And I think
a little bit, yeah.
Well, I think we can use it also as our next step, because we've also talked about the increasing integration of life sciences into other disciplines. And we're seeing ever increasing requirements for interdisciplinary teams, but also for our investors to support them. So coming from more of a healthcare focus, having a breadth of passion for exploration as you do, how do you think about supporting both interdisciplinary teams and cultures, but also being a good partner to portfolio companies that cover so many breadths of just the industry and application areas? Yeah,
so being a good partner to a company, right? This analogy is definitely going to break down here because I don't know if it bared its fruit in the show, but I often think you want to be the king or queen's hand in Game of Thrones, right? You want to be like Tyrion Lannister, right? You have to do it all, even if it's like in the shadows to help these companies. And by the shadows, I mean there's a lot of times you are having to be your company's advocate without even if you get in a good partnership with your founders, you will know how to work with them to speak on their behalf and help them out. So what I think is a large time of being a partner, you just have to do it all, kind of like the king's hand or queen's hand, right? You have to always be showing companies to other co-investors and finding the right fit in market. You need to be finding them BD partners. You need to be prepping CEOs, both for the board meetings that are of the today, as well as the future. A lot of times I think people skip that future element where it's like, you know what those investors are going to be looking for who are coming into this next financing. You should be training them to build for those board meetings later. And I think Alex, you guys actually do a great job of this, right? I think Chaz and Mark's backgrounds here, I think helps effectuate that quite well in helping prep them for how to run board meetings in the future. But I think a large part of it, and where I think the analogy springs most true, is you got to buffer the blind spots of the CEO, right? There's a lot of times where, going into it, when you do your reference calls, I would like to find out where our founders have blind spots and find ways to continue to buffer those, whether it's like, look, maybe it's now the right time to bring in the SAB, or maybe right now is the time to bring on an independent board director who helps fill these functions. That type of high-level thinking and strategy, I think, is very valuable for these companies. And that's really what a good partner should be doing, that's building a company. And then to support the interdisciplinary teams, I think what we put our money where our mouth is. We brought on a head of talent in Yusef Yudin, who, we were really lucky to recruit from a really good life science recruiting firm. And we've applied our data first mindset to what his role is here at KdT. So Yusef actually, to get that interdisciplinary team together, he tracks our talent bench because we work with great founders, we also work with great companies. And in those companies, there's often great personnel who unfortunately sometimes leave to go as a company progresses, or there's consultants that we helped work with who've done diligence on those companies, or there's serial founders that we're now working with because if their company has been acquired and now they're moving to the next thing. We've built a talent bench through that network that we track and try to find ways to piece people's skill sets with the use cases that are needed in our portfolio to help grow those entities and those cultures at these firms. And so, like I said before, great investing begets great investing. I think that talent search and that talent bench component is something that we do quite well. And there's just an organic growth to it all that I think makes the job continuously easier as we become more efficient.
And when you're good people to work with, people want to keep working with you. So that's a phenomenal effort, especially around the personnel side, but it's something, as I think you say, bears outsized dividends. So that's really great to hear, especially for companies at the early stage. One of the greatest challenges is, can we find the right people? So if you're helping with that, that's awesome.
Yusef has been an absolute game changer for our firm today, and we're excited that we brought him in this past year. It was great.
Well, maybe we'll have him on next time.
Yeah.
From the beginning of your time with KdT, you've gotten to see a very future-forward opportunity, a number of future-forward opportunities. You've gotten to explore tech-enabled investments across numerous areas. What are you seeing coming next in the cycle of emerging technologies? We'd love to hear what you're excited by.
Yeah, I think two to just point out is, one is proteomics. So I think one of the biggest things that we're seeing is we need high quality data to inform a lot of our models, and often transcriptional efficiency and translational efficiency don't really correlate, right? Just because there's an abundant RNA in a cell doesn't mean necessarily gets translated. And so and I think what we've seen also with the sequencing space is NGS has largely provided just this plethora of innovation in biotechnology. I think proteomics, if we can actually get a proteomics that has the efficiency and scalability and cost reduction of that of NGS, I think that's going to unlock entirely new markets, right? And can you imagine just throwing some cell lysate through and being able to understand every single protein that's being expressed and all the different mutations that might be in there, or the abundance, and then correlating that to data models? You'll be able to make much more better informed genetic constructs and things of that nature. And so I think right now there's been a lot of fanfare around these affinity-based approaches where people are having to build out antibodies specific to all these different amino acids and combinations of amino acids. I just think they're going to fail. I think they're going to fail in that they're not going to be able to soak this broad swath of market that we're looking for. I think what they might be able to do is find some niche applications, but I think what we need is something more scalable. And I think there's some technologies on the horizon there that we looked at from a thesis perspective that are coming that will be that more scalable, higher throughput, lower cost, easier end user utility that will help answer those questions. I think another place that we're looking at that I think speaks more to the market right now is conditionally activated biologics, right? So I think right now what we need to focus on as an industry is finding opportunities that are clear where pharma is going to bite and understand and thus invest in or want to partner with. I think what's challenging is when capital's tight, innovation, typically less innovative companies get invested in, but I don't think it's less innovative in like a truly negative sense. I just don't think it's going to be like this widget connected to this widget connected to this widget. You get this magical opportunity, right? I think with conditionally activated biologics, it's like, look, we know certain antibodies have really strong mechanisms of action, but they have challenging toxicity profiles that we need to resolve, right? And or like we made them so weak as antibodies because of those toxic profiles that they're just poorly efficacious. And I think if we can make conditionally activated biologics that only act in certain conditions, like an autoimmune state or a tumor microenvironment, I think that's like a perfect example of the type of, they're less innovative, but they're still very innovative companies that we want to back because we understand the buyers that they're going to go to and the buyers understand the technology that they want to work with. And so that's really, I think, two areas that we're quite interested in.
And so as we explore these areas of innovation, we're seeing innovation not only on the science side, but also on the business side. And sometimes that innovation can almost be ahead of the market. Can you talk about, you talked about this earlier with Andy's Bio. Can you share a little bit how you think about advising or getting involved on the go-to-market strategy side and about this sort of holistic company journey for the next wave of life science startups?
Yeah, so I think for traditional healthcare companies, I think the playbooks are more well understood, right? Right now you have to find external validation, and I think once you find the external validation, I think your go-to-market strategy will become much more clear as you start working with those partners. But working with large pharma with big pocketbooks, it's just going to help you develop those technologies and where the market need is most apt. But largely this is just consistent with the past. I just think right now the current market, we're just returning to that given what we're seeing in traditional therapeutics companies. But for the non-therapeutics companies, I think go-to-market is a much more exciting space, right? So we dabble in chemicals, ag, consumer bio even. I think the debate is still out there. And that's what I get a lot of very excited by. Like for specific, like to show a good example on the chemical side of the equation, right? There's a real big tension right now for these specialty chemical companies using SynBio to make these chemicals. I think the tension is, do you go create your own brand? So like we've seen the success of Amyris, right? But we've seen the challenges with companies like Zymochem, right? They didn't know, they were trying to do this B2B partnering angle, but they didn't really know their end customer well. Whereas like Amyris is just like, look, we're going to fully own this and own all the margin that comes from it. And we're going to build our own cosmetic brands. Like that is interesting, right? And that might be the way these SynBio companies eventually produce, like they use these early sales to scale their manufacturing, their platform until cost of goods get cheap enough for them to enter other arenas. Or I think the other way is, do you find partners and scale chemicals through a B2B side, right? Where we understand that transactional value today, right, of what those agreements should represent, and you try to figure out what you're going to partner off versus what you keep internal. Now, this is more of like your traditional hybrid business model of like, look, I'm going to have something that's B2B and something that's wholly owned. But I think I think there's that tension between, do we just create our own brand and these products, or do we leverage that more traditional model? And I think what we'll see for these non-therapeutics chemical companies, that there's going to be certain use cases that work for some, and then other use cases that work for others. And so I think that's where the go-to-market strategy is going to be interesting for this next wave, to bring early revenue through the door and to see what helps them get to volumes of scale in the future.
In fact, it's also very team-driven, because the ability as a scientist to design a technology, a SynBio platform, is typically not the same skill set as developing a brand and building and marketing and gaining customers and market share. So at the same time, as we were saying earlier, having those right people to support the business models you bring forward is also essential. And I think actually I would be willing to make the argument more challenging in SynBio, especially consumer facing, than it is in traditional biotech. But by the same token, for that reason, you also have greater opportunity if you can do it right and find those teams and technologies.
Yeah, and I'll be honest right now, I'm a little biased, right? Because we backed a company that's making a biodegradable diaper, the world's first biodegradable diaper, and they've done it. They've done a production run of it. They've made these diapers. They're incredible. It's Zymochem. And what it's just it's crazy because like we think about therapeutics, right, as a market that's massive, right, and it has a lot of high impact. But like when you think about some of the best drugs, like $1 billion a year drug, that's incredible, right? Diapers is a $65 billion market. It's just a different volume of scale, right? It's like when you think about, I think, I'll give credit to him because I'm a very big fan and reader of him, but like Bruce Booth, right? He tweeted about how the market cap of Facebook moved in alpha hours, which was the same size as like Merck's whole market cap. It just shows that, in biotech, we work in a very privileged space, and sometimes can be in a bubble, but there's these other verticals out there that if we figure them out, we can get these massive returns. But what's really important is Zymochem, right? 8% of the world's landfills are diapers, right? Like that's a huge problem. And so if we can figure out that, we can also have massive impact. And so that's why I keep my eyes open for both this branding versus partnering side and how we think about those challenges.
Makes sense. And it's something I think we can all be excited by as we move forward. So let's pivot slightly and ask, is there anything you're bearish on? We've talked a lot about excitement. Is there anything that you think needs a little bit more of an advance before you'd be excited to invest?
This one's gonna be, it's gonna ruffle a lot of feathers, hopefully, or not intentionally, but I should not say hopefully, not intentionally, but delivery technologies, right? I think non-viral delivery technologies are something that, and specifically LNPs are like in focus today. Every single pharma BD partner I've talked to is all around, like, we're just trying to find a delivery vehicle. I was at ASGCT this year, and it's clearly people are throwing at whatever they can at the wall to see what sticks. And I just think it's challenging. I don't think we have a clear answer or have seen the experimental data validating one platform over the other in many different use applications, right? And so like when we come to LNPs, right, there's been a lot of hype around them because we saw their first FDA approval. Like that's what happens, right? AAV got its first FDA approval. We've seen the success of AAV partnering, the partnering landscape with companies like Dino Therapeutics in our portfolio as a result, right? You got the AAV approval. Yeah, I know, right? They're trying to incept the audience here. No, but we've seen that partnering get driven off of that FDA approval. And I think people are trying to do the same thing with LNPs, right? We've seen that it worked great as a vaccine, but really the promise of the LNPs is that they can be delivered broader than the liver, they can be redosable and these other forms and get to other tissue types. But I just think there's a limited chemistry that you can play with there. And I think the chemistry, like I think we saw that success with Guide Therapeutics getting bought by Beam. That's one that's interesting to track. But they just aren't these vehicles that are machines in the way that AAVs are, or even EVs are, or some of these viral-like particles are that people are developing. And so, I do think there's going to be an application in a space where LNPs will win out. Like we've seen vaccines, they've won out, but in other spaces as well. But currently, I just don't think we're seeing those stepwise changes that are a requisite for the investing that they're probably going to incur given the hype cycle of venture investing. And I think the same thing might happen in other delivery vehicles as well. I just think this is going to be a tough space, and I know the data threshold is going to be high. And so we'll have to see what happens there. But that's where, as someone that's come from delivery, there's some skepticism behind which modality is going to win out now.
Something I've been very entertained to notice is that when an individual, especially an investor, has a personal background in a space, they're almost always bearish there. It's something that I feel like you get to know your own the challenges of your own space, and then you become a little bit more reticent.
Yeah. What's the expression? Ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
There may be a lot that is true there. Ignorance is bliss in a lot of different various areas of technology.
Yeah, that's something I can personally relate to, so I understand. And we've talked about, what you're excited by, a little bit about what you're bearish on. Let me just ask directly, do you have any calls for startups?
I actually have less of a call for startups here. I have more of a call for the broader ecosystem of other folks. I think startups have enough of a burden on themselves. I think what right now is like, and I know I've given you the example of Andy's, I've given you the example of Zymochem. I promise we do a ton in therapeutics as well. It's the vast majority of our portfolio. But something I'm seeing is, I don't know what the temperature is where you are right now, Chris, but it's molten hot here this past week in the United States. We're just seeing that climate is becoming more and more of a problem. It's impacting food supply, it's impacting life. It's like we've seen a massive heat wave through India. Like, it's just a problem that's impacting the globe. And we're starting to see really big funds and ESG mandates get embedded into these financial markets. But what we now need to see is regulatory bodies come to the table, right? So financial markets are trying to create carbon credits. We have companies doing a great job of creating new technologies in the space, but there's this missing regulatory hurdle that's really trying to help funnel these innovations to those financial markets, right? Like, I think a lot of the times there's a lot of skepticism for some of these regulatory groups. Like even, I know Stripe just launched Frontier Climate, right? But that's like, it's in its infancy. We're seeing things like Vera have some skepticism, things like Gold Standard have some skepticism. And I think it's a large part is because we're learning what a good carbon credit should be, right? Like, a lot of them were like these forestry projects where people just like basically bought offsets in these forests that were never going to get cut down anyway. And they just were like transacting on it. Like, that's not a good carbon credit. Like, we should be protecting a forest that was actually going to get cut down. Like, that would have been a good carbon offset. But I think what you need to now have is like these regulatory bodies who are going to help create that market that would be really impactful for things like climate change to really become actualized as a space for innovation. I think the other thing is kind of what you mentioned with the consumer side is consumer bio doesn't really talk to biotech VC or tech VC. And I think we're seeing these tool sets of biotech come down where you can actually hit these like lower margin products as we see the production capabilities get advanced. And so I think what you need to now have is more interdisciplinary investing. Like, you need to have some of these consumer bio VCs, consumer VCs become much more educated on biotech to start partnering with these groups that work at this nexus. And I think at that point, I think you'll start to see how you can figure out some really good consumer product strategies, like on go-to-market, like you're talking about. Like, building a brand is very different from building a biotech company. And often you probably need to separate those entities in the same company and have them be managed by different people with some like limited crosstalk or maybe have greater crosstalk. And I think consumer VCs will know how to do that. I just think they need to dip their toe in the water. So it's less on the startups here, but more on getting these people to the table, and maybe startups have a role in bringing those folks to the table. But I think that's what's missing right now to drive this innovation further.
If I can lend my small voice to get regulators and other investors to move a little bit more at the pace of innovation, I will be happy to put mine behind that message. Very much there with you. These are pressing challenges and things that I'm glad to know KdT is working on, because I certainly have some of that millennial angst to get climate change addressed. And I do think biology, being one next wave of the future, has that opportunity to bring us forward. So
yeah,
what's coming next for KdT?
One word: validation, right? Like, as you know, we're in Fund 3, but we started this in 2017, and in a lot of our portfolio is now going to have a readout here. So I think that's the real thing. We're finally going to really see, do we really know what we're doing or not as investors, which is both exciting and a little bit terrifying. But what I have confidence in is I see the companies in our portfolio have real revenues behind them. They have real partnerships behind them. And so as they start to explore public markets in a few years, right? Or they start to talk to larger acquirers who have these big cash reserves, right? Like, it will be interesting to see how these technologies and their product launches that are associated within are read out, right? Beyond just like the exits of our portfolio, like, we will have things getting to clinic, and are they going to actually treat patients, right? That's the end goal here. That was my guiding light that I told you at the beginning. I just want to be a part of drug development and get a drug across the finish line. Like, that's all the things that are going to actually get to read into our small little fund from 2017 and see, did we really know what we were doing or not? So I think validation is what's coming next for KdT.
I think it's something we're all excited for. And so before we come to a close, just a few rapid fire questions to cap things off. Going back to the beginning, you asked for another shot at early advice for life science VCs or venture investors generally. Wanted to give you that platform.
Yeah, so the first one I said was be authentic. I think the next thing is just read a diversity of ideas, right? Don't like, I think often some people get trapped into reading just, you know, CB Insights or whatever, or Axial, or you know, like certain verticals, right? I think what you want to have is a breadth of reading. Like, read the early scientific literature, read the review articles, read, like, watch Bloomberg, watch CNBC, watch these, like, put those on your TV while you're working out, like, do stuff like that. And I think you'll have a much more robust basis that are be much more effective at either investing or building companies at that intersection of those disciplines. That I think would be helpful.
And that actually leads to what I was going to ask next, which is, how do you spend your free time? But if you're trying to keep up with all of this, I'm starting to doubt you have any, Phil.
No. You gotta keep track of your mental health. Like, that's always something that I think is important. And I think the way you do that is really leaning into your free time on things that you get excited about. I am a big pickup basketball guy here in North Carolina. You kind of have to be, given you got, this is the, I think our governor called it the capital of the center of the basketball universe, because Duke UNC played in the Final Four for the first time this past year, right? Like, there's incredible pickup basketball down here. I do that. I also love cooking. I think that helps with my creative outlets. And so like to test the world of molecular gastronomy, even in my home kitchen if I can. And so those are two of my bigger outlets that help, you know, healthy body, healthy mind is the way I think about it.
Next time I'm in North Carolina, would love to do some cooking with you. It's my background and it's something I have a lot of fun with.
Oh, that's awesome. What's your favorite, you went to school in Philadelphia. What's your favorite restaurant out there?
Yeah, currently going to school in Philly, and it's a great question.
I'll give you an easier one then. How about Pat's or Geno's? Which one you got?
I feel like there's a right answer based on your expectancy.
No. It's fine. It's only a character
personally.
flaw if you choose the wrong one.
I'm going to lean into Pat's, but that's only because I have nostalgia with it. Okay.
That's the right answer. That's the right answer. I grew up in New Jersey, so like I used to go to Sixers games because I was only an hour away, and my dad and I would grab Pat steaks and then go check out the game. So yeah, huge. I'm glad you got the right one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was honestly worried, so I'm glad I did.
No
All
worries.
Before we wrap up, any closing thoughts, shameless plugs?
Not really. I just want to say thanks for the time, Chris. Honestly, what you guys are doing here at BIOS is great. Like I really enjoyed seeing the other guests you've had on, seeing what you guys are doing in the space, and just keep it up. Like, just really appreciate like you, right? We're getting our readouts here over the future. And you guys are building something really hard. And just want to see you keep getting the good word out there from great academics and other investors and company builders.
Thank you, Phil. It's really only possible with the time from people such as yourself. So we're incredibly grateful that you've shared your time with us today and for an absolutely fantastic episode. Thank you again.
Awesome. Thanks.